we're speaking about Vichara, and I know that you guys, I know that you know what Bhagavan has said about Atma Vichara for the most part. No need to really review that. What I would like to do, if you'll give me the permission, is just really focus on maybe at least what I'm hearing here from devotees, the obstacles that they're experiencing in terms of practicing Vichara, and then also speaking about my own struggles with Atma Vichara, and that's the more personal aspect. So I would ask your permission to allow me to share in that way, in a kind of more personal way. Devotees very often here, we have so many devotees coming through here, and these conversations come up all the time, and people complain about their Vichara practice. They say that that it becomes mechanical, and sometimes they get bored or frustrated and they just give it up. Many have just quit trying long back to practice Vichara. So I thought about maybe trying to frame what the obstacle is in my view, and what might be done about it. Bhagavan says in one place, over the centuries, the nature of the I has had an irresistible fascination in the quest of deep thinking minds. Interesting statement. And it's not surprising that this I would be fascinating, especially when we consider that it's arguably one of the most used words in our personal vocabulary, and we actually don't really know what it refers to. So that would be, I think one of the obvious first steps is that if we're going to practice Vichara genuinely, we would have to be interested about what we're looking for. And how would we generate that interest? In other words, asking the question, who am I mechanically, we all know firsthand that's pretty much useless. In other words, it's not a mantra, it's not a prayer, and it's not mechanical. So what is the question, who am I designed to be? It's designed to arouse in us perplexity. In other words, it's designed to, arguably, to bring to awareness the fact that we use this word I, but we don't know where or what the I is. And if we can get interested in that problem, that is an existential problem, arguably, then Vichara starts to become interesting very quickly. Bhagavan says in one place, the illusion created by the mind must be destroyed by the mind. The mind is a bundle of thoughts originating from the thinker. But if examined, if the mind is examined, if thoughts are examined, and then this I is examined, we realize it's not who we are, that there's something below. And what I think the obstacle to practicing Vichara is not the method itself. In other words, it's not the question of who am I. It's not the problem of not knowing an I, not knowing what the I is, and then being unwilling to seek it. It's that the act of seeking it, the looking for it, is uncomfortable. So that's what I want to talk about first, why it's uncomfortable. Many of you will know the Mandukya Upanishad. There's that scene with the two birds. It's been quoted so many times. It's a famous scene, the two birds. In one scene, they're on the same branch. They're constant companions. They're always together. The one bird is looking for things, worms or whatever. It's always pecking, looking for food. The other bird just sits back and watches, the Upanishad tells us. And arguably, these are the two modes of the mind. The one is task-oriented, task completion-oriented, goal-oriented. It's trying to get something. It has a limited domain within which it works. The other bird represents the other mode of the human mind, which is a kind of global awareness. it's not focused on the task at hand, but it's aware of the surroundings. I don't know if you know Ian McGilchrist. He's an Oxford neuroscientist, actually a neuropsychologist, I believe. And he kind of takes that image from the Upanishad and puts it in one bird, a mother bird. He says the mother bird, she goes out, she leaves the nest, she goes out, and she's pecking at a tree, pecking at the bark to retrieve a worm for her babies. Her left hemisphere, this is the one mode the Upanishads talks about. The left hemisphere is focused attention. It's focused and engaged on the task only. Meanwhile, the right hemisphere is scanning the horizon for danger, maybe predators, or the cries of her chicks in the distant nest, any trouble there. So these two things are happening simultaneously and are necessary. The open attention of the right hemisphere includes the pecking. In other words, it's aware of the pecking, not in a detailed way, but in a broad way. Whereas the strategic mind, the one trying to get the worm, is only aware of itself. Now, why is this important? I think it's interesting that cognitive science, brain science, if you will, can kind of give some a way of understanding how and what ego is, and therefore why it might be difficult for us to leave the safe and comfortable domain of ego to penetrate something deeper within us, namely the heart. So the left hemisphere, what McGilchrist says, the left hemisphere's knowledge is mediated within a closed system. It cannot truly break out to know what lies beyond its own domain. This is what gives ego its illusion of certainty. It inhabits a confined space, and knowing that small territory well, it mistakes the limits of the territory for the whole. In other words, ego only knows what is in front of it and cannot know anything else. And this is what gives ego that sense of certainty. And this is also what makes conceptual mind, the egoic mind, comfortable, because we know everything within our landscape. There's no mystery. There's no surprises, really. Everything's mapped out and before us. We can see it. It's visible. But this is also the limits of the ego. And I think this is why we don't like Vichara, because Vichara is asking us to leave that place of safety, that place of comfort, familiar, Conceptual thinking is sequential. It's centered in task completion and goal orientation, while Bhagavan's jnana is spiritual knowledge, intuitive wisdom rooted in choiceless awareness. So it's broad and vast and all-encompassing, but it's not so clear. And also, the area that we end up invariably exploring when we move out of the conceptual mind, the safe domain of the egoic mind, into the heart, we encounter things we don't expect to see. And I think this is where, at least unconsciously, where we bump into the obstacle to Vichara. Because what the tradition tells us is that the samskaras, the vasanas, the karmic accumulations, and we could even bring in Western traumatology and talk about wounding, painful memories. In India, they talk about pitra dosha, the wounds that have been handed down generation to generation, unconsciously, of course. Things that happened to our grandparents or our parents, or even perhaps further back, that never got resolved. Griefs that never got grieved get handed down, and we're born with them. So what Western psychology tells us, this material is, these memories are emotional memories. They're implicit memories, to use the technical language. That means they're pre-verbal, subcortical, not available to the conscious mind, not available to the comfortable egoic realm, by definition. just to give an example, any crisis that occurred in our earliest infancy is not available to the cognitive mind. Why? Because we hadn't developed language yet. We hadn't developed cognition yet. So it cannot possibly be stored as an overt conscious memory. And the same would apply to any samskara that's handed down to us generationally, transgenerationally, or through previous births. Generally, most of us, certainly I can say for myself, I don't have any memory that I'm aware of previous births. Though the tradition says, and Bhagavan seems to also indicate that yes, there are previous births. Okay. So in the model I'm presenting, what I'm suggesting is Bhagavan tells us that our job is to use the questioning, the who am I? We use that question to leave the realm of thought. Now, here's the curious thing about most of us moderns. I don't think this was as common of a mistake in Bhagavan's time, but it's hard to say. Certainly, the illusion is there throughout the generations because even the Upanishads talks about it. We can remember that. I think it's the Katha Upanishad. I've got the quote here. The Katha Upanishad says something like, well, I'm not finding it. Oh, yeah. The joke that the divine played on us is that the divine, the self, is situated in the heart, but the senses are directed outwards, almost guaranteeing that we'll look in the wrong place forever. Because everything that we know, the world that we know, comes to us through the senses. And these are the six senses, not five senses, six senses, which includes the sixth, of course, is the mind itself. So we imagine that when Bhagavan is asking us to look within, we might imagine that he means look within the mind, the thinking mind, thoughts, images, memories. That's not what he's asking us. Thought, the thinking mind, the mind door, if you will, is a sense realm, is a sense sphere. Its objects are outside. They're not inside. Now maybe that's obvious to all of you, but it's certainly not intuitive. We think of the objects of the world, visible objects, sound objects, touch, taste, smell, whatever it be, we think of those as coming to us from something outside of us, but thought, conceptions, concepts, images, memories, theories, cognitions, we think of that as inside. But Bhagavan says, no, that's not where our domain, the domain we're heading towards. We're going to use thought, the who am I, to lead us, to point us, to direct us away from thought to something deeper. Well, what is the true inwardness? If the mind is outside, then what is the true inside that he's talking about? So we'll call it the heart for now. And what is the heart in this understanding? The heart is just really the place, of course, well, it's the place, and we're talking about the spiritual heart, right? That's the place where the self lives, the only place the self can be found. Bhagavan tells us the self cannot be found in the sense domain or outside in the world. Not possible. And so why couldn't we just look into our heart and see the self directly? Is not our spiritual heart the most central part of us? Should be the easiest thing in the world. In other words, I am my heart, so why can't I look inside it and just see the self directly? What's the problem? And the problem is all the things we just mentioned. The karmic accumulations, samskaras, vasanas, pitradoshas, wounds, memories, grief, resentments, and perhaps 1,000 things that we can't put into words because they happened to us before we developed cognition in this birth. They were passed down to us as samskaras, as implicit memories, and are by definition unconscious. So we can't know them through thought or through language. And to make matters worse, they're often painful. So when we do bump into them, we don't experience them as something that we really want to spend much time with. And that's the hard part. That's the bad news, so to say, of this practice. But the bad news is the good news, of course, because the samskaras are there. And we know they're there. The tradition tells us we will not have taken birth, cannot take birth, if there is not karmic accumulation, no samskaras. By definition, the fact that we take birth means that there are samskaras there. Even in Bhagavan, for him to take birth, there had to be unresolved samskaras. And the way we understand Bhagavan's biography, and it's bound to be accurate, just exactly like that. That yes, he was born with unresolved karmas, but at the age of 15, with the death experience, the remaining samskaras and vasanas were resolved once for all. And the only distinction between he and us, let's say, the only distinction is that we haven't resolved our samskaras. And the way he did it, he didn't know anything about Atma Vichara. He didn't know about the ancient tradition of interior questioning. He knew nothing about that. It happened spontaneously. It rose up in him spontaneously. And through the questioning, and you know this scene so well, at the death experience in the upper room in Madurai, he exhausted the final samskaras, and it exhausted the notion of a separate self, the Dihatma Buddhi, if you will. In Scotland, there was, I don't know if you know Artie Lang, the 20th century Scottish philosopher, kind of a psychologist as well. He said, the greatest of all human fears is the fear of the heart, the fear of one's own mind. That's the greatest fear we carry with us. Now, there are other fears related, like, for example, the fear of death. That's very obviously a universal, well, excepting Bhagavan, that's a very widespread fear. But if we can solve the fear of our own heart, of our own mind, then the fear of death is also resolved. Last year in the Catholic lectionary, Alistair may remember this, it came in the Catholic lectionary in the Lenten season last year, year C. And it's a reading from St. Paul. It's it's Corinthians. I think it's 1 Corinthians chapter 15, as I remember. And Paul says, the sting of death is born of the transgressions. And I read that and I thought, wow, what is he talking about? He's talking about samskaras. In other words, transgressions, sin, if you will. Sin just means, by the way, etymologically, it just means separate, broken, apart. Sin, Syn in Danish, Zunden in German, it means separate. It means apart. So sin is the ego in the Eastern language. Ego just means that which thinks it's separate from the source. The wave thinks it's separate from the ocean. The ego thinks it's independent of the self. And what makes it think that? What makes it so? It's the unresolved samskaras, the transgressions. And so you can see how, wow, right there at the root of Christianity, because there's another scripture where it's like, the sting of death cannot touch me anymore. And we also have that idea in the East that if we overcome the Dhatma Buddhi through Vichara, the fear of death drops away. We saw this in Bhagavan's own life. But so R.D. Laing says, yes, our greatest fear is the fear of our own mind. And he may be right. I mean, it could just be a Western thing, right? Maybe he means Western culture. But then when you go, as an anthropologist, let's say, you go and you start looking in other cultures, you'll find it appearing everywhere. For example, you'll find in children's stories around the world, you'll find a common theme where the hero, he or she must, I'm keeping an eye on my time, he or she must enter a dark cave or a dark lake, go swim to the bottom of a dark lake in the nighttime on a moonless night, right? Or a dark well, and he or she will encounter a monster there. And that monster is guarding a precious gem that must be retrieved. Or in some stories, it could be in the Western mythology, it will be a princess sometimes. She has to be saved in order for the world to be restored to order. And of course, the gem or the princess is a symbol of the self. The five-headed monster is a symbol of the samskaras, the samskaras, the vasanas, the pitradosha, the wounds. And the dark cave, of course, is the heart that we don't want to enter. And the ego does not want us to enter. Because ego, Freud said ego is a defense mechanism. It's there to help us. And in one way of looking, you could say it's like a survival algorithm. It rearranges the data that we receive from the world and helps us to order it in a way that ensures our high functioning. That would be the positive angle on ego. But the problem with ego is just not true. And if our survival is not in threat, we need something more true than what it can offer us for the fullness of life to be experienced. So that means we have to contend with that monster, five-headed monster. We have to contend with the darkness of the cave or the well. In the Beowulf story, it's the dark lake. Remember, Beowulf, he has to take off all his armor. See, the kind of masculine courage has to be left behind. And he's going to use feminine courage to take on Grendel's mother, to descend to the bottom of the lake. And the archetypal symbol there at the top of the lake, it's nighttime, by the way. There's no moon, but there's a stag there. It's a kind of symbol of male power, of male strength. And it's showing us male power won't help us here. It's not warrior courage. It's the courage to look within, the willingness to challenge ourselves. So we all know what the Upanishad says, that the place we have to look is within the heart, and yet we just keep looking outwardly. Why? Especially when we know that we're looking in the wrong place. Why do we keep doing it? We remember that scene of Nasruddin. I don't know if you know the kind of the Sufi, I don't know if he's a Sufi saint. You can say he's a kind of a wise fool. Beautiful stories that come from the Middle Ages about Nasruddin. In one of them, he's searching for his key out underneath the street lamp, and the neighbors come by and start helping him to look for the lost key. And they say, well, but where did you drop it? And he says, well, I dropped it over there near the door. And they said, but then why are you searching here under the street lamp? He says, because there's light here, and over there it's really dark. So it's a metaphor for what we're all doing, really. And this is why our vichara doesn't work, because we want to look in the place where there's light. And we don't want to go looking around, poking around in the place where it's dark. There's a line from Plato, Plato kind of gives a psychological explanation of how that could happen. We know intellectually, we know Nasruddin is a fool here. How silly to look in the place for the lost key in the place where it can't be found. How foolish. And yet that's what we're doing all the time. So Plato has this beautiful line. He says, it's about deception. He says, whatever has the power to deceive also has the power to enchant. It means we're willing to go along with self-deception so long as it gets us off the hook of having to do something we don't want to do. And that's kind of what the whole psychology of the false hard way is. The false hard way is doing a bunch of stuff that's difficult, holding the fire to our feet, so to say, on things that are very difficult, being willing to sacrifice everything except the one thing that needs sacrificing. And that's why it's the false hard way. It looks real because it's hard, but it's false because it's a trick. We're tricking ourselves from having to do the one thing that we don't want to do. And that's look within our heart. There's that line, it's been quoted so many times, but I'll just quote it again because it fits. It's Blaise Pascal. And he says, all of humanity's problems stem from the unwillingness to sit quietly in a room alone. Well, again, this is like the dark cave again. We're willing to sit in a room alone so long as we have our cell phone with us, or a television, or a good novel, or a friend, or a book. But to sit in a room alone with nothing can be very challenging. If it's not challenging for you, excellent, wonderful. Then the door to vichara is open to you, free for the taking. See, it's here where would-be practitioners of vichara will kind of lose their nerve a little bit. So let's say, Bhagavan, isn't there some other way to do this? Isn't there some other way that we can make the mind quiescent? Bhagavan says, other than inquiry, there are no other adequate means for making the mind quiescent. That's a strong statement. Surely there must be some other way. In other words, surrender. Couldn't we just practice surrender instead? But surrender has the same problem. Surrender is very much like inquiry. Because as soon as you give yourself over, as soon as you are willing, I should say, as soon as we are willing to accept all that comes to us, then we're back there in the cave again, and we have to face that monster. So yes, surrender is an alternative, but it's got the same challenging part, and that's namely the fear of our heart. You may recall that conversation between Swami Yogananda and Sri Bhagavan in the hall somewhere around 1935 or 1936. And I think it was 35. Yogananda was here with a small group. And as he's leaving, he asks, Bhagavan, is there not some other way? Like, why should the path to God realization involve so much suffering? And Bhagavan says something like, well, suffering is the way. And then he was like, well, yeah, but couldn't Ishwara have ordained it otherwise? And then Bhagavan just says again, suffering is the way. So why would suffering be the way? Like, why does this work have to be uncomfortable? And arguably, it's because suffering points us to what needs attention, namely the samskaras and the vasanas. The tradition tells us if the samskaras come into view, if through stillness or through vichara or through silence, we encounter the samskaras, if they come into view, if they come into awareness, awareness cooks them, and their power to sprout and causes trouble is nullified. In other words, all we have to do is become intimate with the samskaras and the vasanas, the karmic afflictions, to heal them. In the Christian tradition, it's said, sin thrives in darkness. And there's similar lines in the Eastern tradition, that samskaras, when they remain hidden, out of view, that's when they cause us trouble. And that's why vichara is the only adequate means. What Bhagavan means is there's no way to avoid becoming intimate with samskaras, vasanas, the psychic fragments of the hidden heart, so to say. There's no other way to heal them than by becoming intimate with them. Some of you will know the Devi Mahatmyam. There's that scene. Remember, Chandi Devi has been called on to come in and deal with Raktabij, because Raktabij, if you'll remember, he has the boon that he can be killed. You can chop his head off. But if one drop of blood, of Raktabij's blood, hence the name, right, touches the soil, touches the earth, and a new Raktabij springs up. So they go to Chandi Devi, say, please, Ma, help us. So she comes in with her sword, and she goes into battle with Raktabij, and she cuts off his head. And as the blood splatters, she sticks out her long tongue and intercepts all the blood before it hits the ground and swallows it. Now think of that as an image. It's a very powerful image, and it's not coincidental. It's telling us that we have to become intimate with the enemy being ego. Remember, Bhagavan says that the ego is animated by the light of the self. The ego is not a monster or a demon per se. It's the illusion of separateness that's the monster. So the thing we want to kill we have to become intimate with it in order to overcome it. The only demon that can harm us, one saying goes, is the one we run from. The only samskaras that can trouble us are the ones that we refuse to look at, to become intimate with. There's a line in the Sufi tradition, do you think you shall enter the garden of bliss without having undergone the trials of those who have gone before you? That's what we would like to happen. We would like it to be like we're willing to do anything just so long as we don't have to do the unpleasant part. And Bhagavan's suffering is the way. He's not keen on suffering. He just knows what suffering is. It's telling you where the fragile parts of the heart are. It's telling you where you have to go. And yet what we do is we go away from them, from those places, rather than towards them. in my younger years, I was a philosophy student, and I thought that um, philosophy and thinking and learning could heal me. And I spent 10 years doing that. And I became more neurotic as the years went by. Now, you could say I had nice explanations, rationalizations for my neurosis, but I was increasingly unhappy. And I really did believe that thinking could free me. But if I'm honest, when I look back, there was a kind of it's that same self-deception that Plato is talking about. I'm willing to do anything. I'm willing to read any number of books, study 15 hours a day, just so long as I don't have to go into the dark heart, the cave of the heart. At the end of my academic career, if you can call it that, I was doing some field work in Guatemala, and this very overactive mind, a mind that had been excessively active for 30 years, suddenly went silent. This happened not by accident. It was in the context of yoga. I didn't know anything about yoga. It just so happened that it was the only exercise available in the place where I was. And there was a practice given at the end of each yoga session where you were asked to empty your mind. Well, I couldn't empty my mind. It was impossible, and that was very frustrating. So each time I would go to those classes, I would put everything I had to into following the instructions, if you will, to empty the mind. And it seemed absolutely impossible, absurdly impossible, just unthinkable that my mind could be empty, silent, still. And then one day, my mind went quiet. And it was the greatest event of my life, the only true meaningful event of my life, really. And that started my spiritual life, my religious life. And then I understood what I had been doing. I didn't know that the heart was a place. I thought I lived in the conceptual mind, and I thought the heart was just a name we give to a certain area of the thinking mind. I thought that the great poets and the great saints of the ages, that they were just exaggerating or kind of embellishing with their words about sublime experiences. And with that experience, I realized they were just speaking about their own direct experience of ordinary things. And a kind of culminating moment for me was when I was squatted down before a pile of rubbish in the early morning out under a cobblestone street in the 16th century Spanish colonial town where I was living in Guatemala, and just observing a pile of rubbish, banana peels, orange rinds, cigarette butts, a Coca-Cola can, flies hovering over it, and astonished to see that pile of rubbish was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, and thinking, how strange, how did I never see it before? And it was because all my life I lived outside my own heart. And I didn't even know till then that I even had a heart. And I knew then I was never going to finish my graduate work. I was never going to have an academic career. And that I was going to take up the life of Vichara from that point on. I only have a few minutes. I'll just say a couple more things. I was trying to think how you might give a kind of image, a story of the trap we find ourselves. So I thought about a king. Let's make it a king in the Middle Ages, just to make it kind of romantic. But let's do an anachronistic maneuver and say that this king was a Ramana devotee in the Middle Ages. And so the king, his advisors come to him, they say, "Sire, the enemy army is approaching." So the king rallies his soldiers and goes out to fight. And the advisors say, "Sire, there's a small battalion there's a field there nearby the kingdom that's called the Sri Ramana, the Bhagavan Sri Ramana victory field, where the king has won important battles before. There's a small battalion approaching from there, and there's a larger, better armed force approaching the palace through the forest nearby." So the king goes out to fight. He goes to the Bhagavan Sri Ramana victory field and enters into a battle with this small battalion there and wins a victory. And on his way back, he's about to climb the ridge and cross the valley to come back to the palace. The advisor comes over the ridge, distressed, and says to the king, "Sire, why did you come and meet this small and insignificant battalion when the greater force was threatening the kingdom through the forest?" And the king says, "Well, the forest is very dark, can't see much there. And besides, the Sri Ramana victory field, that's where I've won battles before. So I came and I fought this battle in Bhagavan's name and won in Bhagavan's name." And the advisor says, "But sire, did you not see the living Bhagavan on the hilltop, on the mountaintop there, pointing you, directing you to go into the forest?" And the king says, "You mad fellow, what are you talking about, the living Bhagavan? There's only one Bhagavan. And he's installed over here in the Mantapam at the head of the Sri Ramana victory field. Have you not read the plaque there, noting previous victories in Bhagavan's name? I went there and fought in Bhagavan's name and won." And the advisor says with a very heavy heart, he says, "But sire, the enemy has sacked the kingdom, has put the loyal guards of the palace to death, to sword, has carried away the king's daughters and wife and mother and all the women of the kingdom into captivity to be sold as slaves. He looted the royal treasury, the crown jewels. The enemy burned, set fire to all the towns and villages and crops and fields and burned them to ash. There's nothing left." And the king says, "Well, what is that to me? I'm a Ramana devotee. I've gone forth and won a victory in Bhagavan's name. That's all that matters." So it's a very weird story. I mean, like, what kind of devotee would that be? But in a way, we run the risk of being very much like that king, in the sense that we create a safe ground to do our battles and avoid doing battle where it counts, doing battle where Bhagavan's asked us to do battle. And it's understandable. I mean, I'm not trying to be a, severe or I mean, it's understandable that we fight where we feel safe, but we're being asked to go where we don't feel safe. Okay, my time is up, so I didn't quite get through my notes. Darn. Ah, golly. Okay, there's a lot left here, but I'm too wordy. So let's keep the schedule. Darn. Yeah, okay. Well, I'll just say, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. We don't have a huge number of questions. So, I mean, there are questions. So if you want, just continue for a few more minutes.
Okay, I'll just try to cherry pick through a few other things here. So I think part of our struggle with vichara is partly innocent, in the sense that when Bhagavan says, look within, we look into the only within that we really know, and that's the thinking mind, forgetting that actually is the sense realm. So if you remember, there's that line this comes in Viveka Chudamani, which Bhagavan translated Adi Shankara's work. And so he says through Adi Shankara, he says, if you really want liberation, cast away the pleasures of sense objects as though they were poison. And in many ways, for Ramana devotees, I would say, because we are sadhaks, we're aware of the pitfalls of the sense realm, but we fail to see that the conceptual mind, the thinking mind, is also the sense realm. Those are the mental objects are outward and not inward. What was meant to dissolve the thinker, ironically, becomes central in its maintenance. Conceptual constructions are taken for reality, while inquiry, which should be fluid and self-erasing, becomes fixed and self-reinforcing. And Bhagavan says, the mind has always this sort of difficulty. It wants a certain theory to satisfy itself. No theory is necessary for the one who seriously desires to approach God or to realize their own true being. So this was the trap I fell into in my philosophy years, taking structure and formulation for wisdom. Rather than weakening the mind, we can unwillingly fortify it, while the sense of being a separate self remains untouched. So that would be the inquiry that gets boring quickly, that feels mechanical, because it's not going where the action is. Bhagavan's vichara is not meant to refine thought, but to dissolve the thinker. We all know this intellectually, but we fall into the trap of refining our understanding of vichara without actually doing what vichara asks us to do, dissolve the thinker. Thus, what often passes for clarity may only be a more sophisticated entanglement. We unwittingly distort the method by making it into something to master intellectually, rather than something that would call into question the very authority of the intellect itself. Bhagavan's instruction is disarmingly direct. First, resolve the mystery of the one who seeks. Only then can questions regarding the ultimate nature of reality be taken up. So we've all seen this in the literature. The person comes up, the devotee asks a sincere question. Bhagavan, is the cosmos, is the universe eternal or finite? And Bhagavan says, find out who you are first, then ask that question if it's still interesting. So to reverse the order, to speculate about the absolute while remaining rooted in Dhatma Buddhi is putting the cart before the horse. It assumes that conceptualizing can free us from conceptualizing. It assumes that the confused processing of the ego can clean up the confusion itself. Stated briefly, the mind is a useful servant, but a poor master. The transformative power of genuine inquiry lies not in drawing conclusions, but in sustaining the perplexity of questioning, the not knowing. Who am I is not a question to be answered. It's not meant to be met with more words or concepts. It's not a question to be answered, but a fire to be entered. It should not culminate in additional knowledge, but in the dissolution of the knower. So we have to double underscore that. We all know this, and yet we fall into that same trap over and over and over again. And so what's the compassionate angle on this? It's like the guy who has to build the boat to cross the flood. He or she knows they have to get across the flood, but they don't want to cross the flood. The ocean is a dangerous place, especially on stormy nights. So what do? We just keep perfecting the boat, making it more seaworthy, perfecting our navigational charts, making them more accurate. Maybe even we build a yoga room, an altar on our boat, and chant Bhagavan's texts, do puja, continue painting and cleaning up the boat, making it a better boat, just so long as we don't have to set sail. I mean, that's like the map maker being obsessed with the map, but never actually putting it to use. And actually, we live in a time where we have a ton of maps. Our problem is not maps. We don't need more maps. We need to learn how to cross the territory they're indicating. And that's something our generation is not doing very well at. Arguably 100 years ago, those disciples who gathered around Bhagavan up in Skandashram, they were crossing the territory. So 100 years later, and arguably, the world has changed. We're living in the midst of a digital revolution. Everything's high speed. The nervous system is activated beyond imagination. We're stressed. We're anxious. We're living a few steps ahead of ourselves. So it's understandable. If it was difficult to do vichara then, all the more so now. And yet, this is what we're being called to. If you remember, Bhagavan once said, knowledge is ignorance. What on earth could he mean? Is this not jnana marga? The whole thing is about knowledge, right? But what he was talking about is that knowledge is an attainment, the map that we worship and revere, that we cling to as the goal, whereas the goal lies ahead. In other words, Bhagavan's teaching is not a philosophy. It's not a doctrine. It's not an ontology. It's not a school of Advaita. It's a method. It's a path. It's a heuristic device with one purpose: to cross the difficult, dark territory of the hidden heart. That's its purpose. I've even come to think of my own map making as a kind of dissociative mechanism. It's so mistaken that there's something else at work there. It's, in other words, I'm dissociated from my own heart to such an extent that I'm not even aware that I'm afraid of it. And that fear is something we can work with gently, compassionately, slowly. Like a mother holding her crying baby, the baby just doesn't want to seem to shut up. She's not trying to make it shut up. She just holds it in her affection. It's beautiful to see a mother do this. Not every mother can do this, but it's amazing to see. Oh, probably every mother can do it sometimes. Holding the crying baby, she's not trying to shut the baby up. She just giving the needed care in the moment. And that's how we treat our fear of the heart, like a crying baby. And we just keep holding that fear, that crying baby, like a loving mother would. Well, look, I can't go on forever, but darn, I had a lot of notes here, but I'll just skip them. Yeah, I'm going to leave it there. I mean, yeah.
You can also come back again and finish off. I suspect that people will go back and sort of think about it, and there usually are a lot of questions. I'm not sure, about their own practice and what they've experienced and how to tackle it. And I suspect that may come out a bit later on. But I'll just start with the questions then.
Okay.
I'm going to start with the questions on self-inquiry. I forgot to mention this, that let's start with that. And then if we have time, then if there are other questions, then you can ask them. The question is, what is the relationship between energy and vichara? A marathon requires energy to complete. So do we have to raise our mental fitness to be sharp enough to tackle vichara?
Wow. Okay. That's an interesting question. I think so if we're going to talk about energy, I would put that in terms of interest, enthusiasm. That's what the perplexity is about. So, how do we cultivate that? Well, so if we're going to enter into an athletic event, we have to kind of psych ourselves up. I mean, and I think vichara is a little like that in the sense that we're going to undergo something. An athletic event, especially if it's a long distance race, it's an ordeal. And vichara is a little like that. But of course, for those of you who practice vichara, you know that as you gain interest in the practice, it fuels itself, it inspires itself, because you uncover territory you had not seen before, and that gives you, that excites you and interests you. In fact, sometimes it interests you so much that you can't do anything else. So in my notes here, I didn't get to that part. I spoke about times in my own practice where you become like a who idiot, a vichara idiot. And what does that mean? That just means, it doesn't mean you're saying, who am I? But there's that sense of being involved in something internal that is so indistinct and so unknown, but so interesting and so captivating that nothing else can come in. This is ideal for vichara. Now, it has an element of discomfort, because insofar as we're used to inhabiting the thinking mind, what the conceptual mind loves is clear and distinct answers, word answers. It likes visibility. But it's possible for all of us, and I know that because it was possible for me, someone who was so lost in conceptualization, it seemed impossible, very unlikely someone like me could ever enter into that heart, that dark heart, the hidden heart, if you will, and interact with the mystery there. And so being a who idiot is like, wow, being amazed at what's being uncovered. If you want to say who or what, you could. What on earth, But it doesn't need words. I mean, there comes a point where the words are not where the pronouns are not decisive. It's the questioning or the feeling of questioning. And that's energy. And it is, I would say that's the most powerful, or at least maybe not quantitatively powerful, but qualitatively interesting energy there is in human experience. The force. Bhagavan calls it a force. So I'll see if I can find that quote. He talks about, where is it? I'm sure I'm not going to be able to find it here. Oh, no, I think I took that out. But he talks about there's a force from within. Oh, I do think I have that. Wait a minute. Give me a second. Oh, yeah. Well, actually, no. But anyway, he talks about a force from within that he calls grace. And that inquiring from above, in other words, inquiry at least starts as intention. That's from the mind. We set ourselves the task to look within. So to that extent, it's conceptual. But that force within, as soon as we start to move below the thinking mind, that force within, grace, gets activated. And the two work together. That's what he says. Yeah. Okay, I don't want to go on too long. Give you guys a chance to comment or ask questions. Yeah.
Yeah, the next question is, there is a frustration of not knowing if I'm trying to sync awareness from head down to the heart center, or bring the heart center awareness up to the head. Is this a common occurrence? And also, I think Bhagavan said that where this center is located, whether between the eyes or in the chest, is not important. Could you elaborate, please?
Yeah, right. Yeah, we don't need to be concerned with spatiality. See, that's very, the conceptual mind has a map of the universe, including a map of the body. What it doesn't have a map of is the heart. That it doesn't have a map of and cannot have a map of. So no, I would not try to bring the heart up into the head. That's simply impossible, first of all. And it would be the wrong task to set ourselves to. What we're doing is we're using questioning to break us out, to set us free from the compulsion to thought and to use the strategic mind, if you will. See, we're trying to become that bird that just watches. Now, arguably, we're also the first bird. The first bird is looking for stuff. And what are we looking for? We're looking for the object of the investigation, the Atma Vichara. We're looking for the self. So to that extent, yes, we're like the first bird. But we're trying to move from the one to the other. The first one, we got that wrapped up. We know that bird very well. The other bird we bump into accidentally, or if we're meditators, we might know it. We might know that place. And if we do, then our work is much easier. But the hard part is leaving the safe domain of thought, of the thinking mind, and moving below thought. If you're a meditator, if you experience stillness on a regular basis, and I'm speaking of inner stillness, silence, this is not hard for you. And in fact, it may not even be necessary for you, because your stillness, in a way, is the fruit of vichara. Or you could say it is an ally in vichara, the greatest ally. So I'll turn it over to you, Shalini.
Yeah, the next question, it's sort of been answered, but no harm in repeating. If self resides in the heart, why is it described as a dark cave and scary to look at? Are you saying it's also where sanskaras and vasanas live, which make it scary?
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying. I'm not saying that, look, Bhagavan talks about hridayam, and he really, in a way, he uses the spiritual heart kind of synonymously with the self. But what I'm saying is, it's not that it is like that. It's like the thing that blocks the view of the self, that blocks the path to the self, are the samskaras, the vasanas, the psychic fragments, if you will, the unresolved grief, the unresolved wounds, the unresolved karmas. They block the way. Or another way of thinking about it, the whole egoic realm and our infatuation with conceptual mind is a reaction to all that. to the samskaras. And in fact, very often, samskara, as you all will know, most of you will know this, very often is translated as reactivity. The reactivity is a form of dissociation. It's saying, no, I don't want that. And he's been saying that for generations and lifetimes. No, not that. And the thing that is being rejected piles up, so to speak. I mean, this is a metaphor, of course, piles up on top of the spiritual heart and blocks the path to the self. And what we want, what we all pray and hope for, is that there's a nifty, clean way around all the affliction and suffering to get to the self directly. Wouldn't that be great? Bhagavan says, no, won't work that way. This is what Yogananda is asking him. Why? Why do we have to suffer? Couldn't God have ordained it some other way? And Bhagavan says, suffering is the way. And why? Because the suffering is going to point you precisely to those samskaras that need to be met with in order to open the path to the heart, to the self.
The next question, it's quite long, but anyway, but it's very appreciative. Thank you, Michael. How refreshing to take a more psychological and philosophical approach to Ramana's teachings as an attempt to form a kind of bridge between East and West. I think it was Krishnamurti, a good example of East meets West, who said if we truly look at our fear of death, we might notice it is not an actual fear of death or the unknown. In its true form, it is in fact a fear of losing the known and our attachment to that known and our sense of identity, a kind of death. It would also seem it is a sense of shame that prevents us more than anything else from looking within. The mind employs shame as a way of preventing us from truly looking within and seeing those things, those entities that live within us, that show us in such a bad light. We would rather tell ourselves little lies and preserve our public image, not only to others, but to ourselves. Vichara seemed primarily hindered by a fear of losing the known and the strong blocking sense of facing our feeling of shame.
Wow, amazing. Excellent. Really, that's just the summation of what I spent, whatever it is, 50 minutes saying in so many words. That's a summation right there. That's, yeah, I don't think you can really improve on that. But okay, so then just to say a little bit about shame, okay, it's very interesting. I think of shame, and here we're speaking about toxic shame. Shame is a form of inwardly directed blame, and blame is outwardly directed. And so, because if we're not well situated within the heart, if we're living outside of our heart, then there's going to be suffering. And we look for something in our environment very often. I don't know if you remember that. There's that study that Robert Sapolsky did. Sapolsky was at, I think it was at Stanford. He's a, what is he? I think he's a neuropsychologist, I think he is. And he was studying stress and anxiety. And he showed how rats, they would administer electric shocks to rats in the laboratory. And the rats that could go over and bite a neighboring rat didn't develop symptoms of stress. Cortisol didn't flood the bloodstream. They didn't develop ulcers, just simply by the fact that they had something to go over and offload their pain on. The rats that didn't have a neighboring rat to go over and bite suffered symptoms of stress. So, and I'm just summing up a large study that has a lot of very interesting details to it that I'm not giving right now. But it's suggesting that we're hardwired as mammals to do just that, to redirect, to project our blame onto others. Now, shame is directing the pain inward toward the self. We create a self, the ego, and we blame that ego. It did this, this, and this, and therefore I'm suffering. But what Bhagavan is asking us to do, neither blame outwardly nor blame inwardly. Blame is not the blame outwardly, blame inwardly means toxic shame. That's not the response. The response is to feel the pain that's being rejected, that's being projected as best we can. Sometimes we can't. Sometimes we have to blame. But can we remember that blame is just it's a defense mechanism. Blame is a defense mechanism. Shame is a defense mechanism. And both of them are harmful, spiritually, arguably psychologically, but understandable at the same time. Now, what J.K. said there about fear of leaving the known, boy, that's insightful. I think everyone will appreciate the insight there. That's one of the more insightful quotes I've heard from J.K. That covers a lot of ground. And I think that's a little bit what Artie Lang was talking about. If we can overcome the fear of the heart and the fear of the mind, then the fear of death is kind of taken care of already. Because to overcome the fear of the heart and the fear of the mind already is to leave behind a little bit the known. I'll turn it over to you, Shalini.
Nice. Yeah, the next question now. When engaged in the practice, one reaches silence. That silence does not appear to be empty. When focusing deeply in the silence, the sound Om appears to be present. Then what? Is it to stay there? Sorry for the clumsy language in describing what seems impossible to describe.
Wow, okay. Well, the silence is very mysterious. I don't think there's any direction needed there. If it's truly, I mean, it is. What's being described there sounds like silence. So why argue with that? Why argue with that? Yeah. Ideally, if silence can be our refuge, rather than, say, the refuge that I indulged in for decades, namely the busyness of thought, if we make silence our refuge, man, we're good to go. I mean, it doesn't get much better than that. And I think that's what Bhagavan did mean, when he would talk about, summa iru. He's talking about, of course, not material, he's not talking about physical stillness or material silence. That means not speaking. He's talking about inner repose, stillness within, and the silence of the mind. As for Om, that certainly doesn't present any problems for silence. So if the sound of Om accompanies that silence, I don't see that as a problem at all. And it may be, for this questioner, it may be a vehicle, a way of reaching silence by using the Om, the sound, whether that be an audible sound or internal sound. I'll turn it over to you, Shalini.
Okay. Michael, can you say more about the heart? What exactly is it?
Well, see, again, that's the question. It's like saying, what is the self? Like, really, can we know? This side of becoming the self, this side of resolving the samskaras, whatever we say about the heart or the self, it can only be very limited. And I think this is why Bhagavan, we would come to him with our questions, philosophical questions or ontological questions or whatever, and he would just say, find out who you are first, and then ask that question if it's still interesting. Yeah, it's not clear to me that whatever we say about the self, I mean, it's very interesting when Bhagavan himself, who's abiding in the self, he speaks about it in a very mysterious way. So it's not clear to me that's something that can be spoken of at length, or that should be delineated. And if we do delineate it, we're bound to be mistaken. But then, of course, here in this talk, I've used the heart a lot as if I know what it is. And really what I'm meaning when I talk about heart, I mean the borderland between the conceptual mind, the thinking mind, the egoic mind, if you will, and that vast territory that lies below, which I'm suggesting houses the self or is the self. The interesting part for us, the important part for us, I don't think we need to know what the self is. The important part for us is knowing what blocks the path. That's all we need to know. And that's a little bit where we, again, that thing of obsessing on the map, obsessing on doctrine, obsessing on a clear understanding about the territory ahead before we venture out into the journey. And Bhagavan is saying, don't worry about that. Find out who you are first. Then if you want to make those clarifications later, you can do so. Again, I firmly believe, I believe that Bhagavan's teaching is a heuristic. It's a method. It's a path. And he suggests that in many ways, in various places, just as the Buddha did. Same with the Buddha. The Buddha is not interested in philosophy. And Bhagavan is not interested in maps beyond what will take us to the next step. Yeah, that's what I would say to that. Yeah, I'll leave it to you, Shalini.
Michael, can you say more about your own practice after all these years? How do you go about it?
Well, okay, so I'm a meditator. I mean, at least I like to think of myself as a meditator. I don't know how good of a meditator I am. I've been at it a long time. I put in a lot of hours, but I'm surprised sometimes how, sometimes how disabled I am on the cushion. At the same time, there have been breakthroughs over the decades, I have to say. And Vichara has been a great help to me, and I think continues to be, except not exactly in the Vichara that we get, say, in certain of Bhagavan's instructions. In other words, I'm not really using the phrase, who am I? But the inward investigation takes the form of a feeling of questioning. So a looking within, and not necessarily focused on the idea of some self or the ego, which every meditator kind of knows. And even if you're not a meditator, we know, at least intellectually, the ego is kind of made up, So then what are we looking for? If we have to answer that question, I'm not sure that we should, but if we were forced to, we would say we're looking for the composite parts. We're looking for the features, the psychic fragments that give rise to the ego delusion. And in healing those, the ego, the intense investment in the ego reduces. And I think I know so many of you, especially the old timers, I know you know what I'm talking about. That over time, part of it's the grace of aging, no doubt, but it's also the steady, ongoing practice on the cushion that we're not so foolish as we were in an earlier period in our life. And we can really see progress. It doesn't mean ego has been wiped out, but it's just not so compelling as it was once upon a time. There's not as much reactivity, or when something happens that we don't like, we don't have to push against it so forcibly. There's a tolerance and a patience and acceptance about the conditions of our lives, an acceptance about the parts of ourselves that we once took issue with. Even in my own life, I saw myself here recently. I did or said something, I can't remember what it was, And afterwards I realized, my God, that was a really kind of narcissistic, it was a real kind of an expression of my own narcissism. And before, that would have been an occasion, that realization would have been an occasion to kind of judge myself and say, my God, you really are caught up in your conceit or your pride or whatever, And just in that moment, as that kind of shame narrative was about to come on, I realized, oh, I don't have to shame myself about that. Because the shame itself is the key ingredient of one of the key ingredients of narcissism, just a feature of narcissism. So the way we overcome our narcissism is not being too fixated. In other words, having a gentle hand, like the mother. Let's say let's take a different child. A child is really misbehaving in public, behaving in a way that's socially unacceptable and that may embarrass the family. But we see the mother just being patient with the child. Can we do that with ourselves? Our narcissism, our egoism expresses itself in a way that it's clearly narcissistic, egoic. But can we just hold all that? And if we can, wow, that's good news. Because that's how we overcome the egoic defense. The egoic defense is that we would be seen as we truly are and be unacceptable to others. And when we don't have to buy into that so much anymore, then, yeah, we're on our way, arguably. That's what I would say.
The next question. There is a school of thought that strong suppressed feelings wrap around the ego and prevent self-inquiry, and that the antidote to this is to feel the feelings, to liberate them, and thus enable self-inquiry. This is a bit of a paraphrase, but I think it captures the essence of the approach.
Well, I mean, the only thing I would say, I think that's exactly right. The only thing I would word it a little differently. I'm not sure that it's repressed thoughts surround the ego. That's what ego is made of. Remember, it's a defense mechanism. It's a samskara. It's a defense. So ego is the name we give to those mechanisms of repression, defense, denial, dissociation, the grief denied, frustrations denied, regrets over things done in this life, regrets that have never been fully acknowledged, unconscious material, painful material from early life or from previous generations. So the ego is the name we give. Like, again, I think, cognitive science has this interesting, comes in brain science when they talk about the salience network, entropic filtering. It's a feature of the brain that filters out data that is unpleasant or that is disturbing. And a lot of those things are unpleasant and disturbing. So we're kind of tweaking the algorithm a little bit in doing Bhagavan's practice. We're inviting, because the brain is very plastic. And I'm not, by the way, I'm not taking a materialist position. I don't think we're just matter. I'm not saying that, but I just mean brain science has some metaphors to offer us. So we're tweaking the algorithms. We're allowing the ego defense to be less defensive. We're allowing certain data that might otherwise get filtered out. We're allowing it through. And that we call, in the spiritual tradition, honesty, self-awareness, earnestness, sincerity, purity of heart. We're coming to see that the filters, if you want to call it entropic filtering, the entropic filtering that served us at certain periods in our life, let's say when we were children or when we were young adults, moving into the very difficult terrain of individuation and having to become an adult and go to school, go to college, start a career, get married, have children, all those things. That filtering was probably more of an ally than an enemy. But now we're being asked to move beyond it. Or to upgrade it a little bit. Change the algorithm a little bit. I'll turn it over to you, Shalini.
Experiencing ourself as nothing, that is not identified with anything, is the beginning goal. Atma Vichara for me points the awareness inward where this nothing can be experienced. When we use inquiry to empty the mind, to see where we are identified, then this gets us closer and closer to experiencing ourselves as nothing. In experiencing ourselves as nothing, we instantly see ourselves as everything. Can you please comment, Michael?
Well, I mean, I think that's right, but I just wonder, it's absolutely what you say is just right. I'm speaking about the questioner. The only thing is we've got to, we want that. We don't need to know. We don't need all those names to know that that's what we're doing. We just need the stillness. If you've got that stillness in your practice, you're on your way. You don't need any. I don't think we can add to that. In other words, words or names or maps are not going to assist you, are not going to help you. You don't need, if you can come to that kind of stillness, there's nothing here that we can talk about that will really help you much. And nor do you need any help, The thing is, though, very often we, and I do this myself, I get attached to, like we love to look, we're climbing the mountain, right, up to enlightenment. And we stop and we look up ahead to look at the peak, to get the inspiration. That's where we're trying to get to. There's nothing wrong with that, to do that occasionally. There's the peak. It really is the place we need to get to. But from the point of view of practice, we don't need to involve ourselves too much with that. In a way, that's almost a distraction if we do it too much. If we can still the mind and come to a place of nothingness, wow, great. Because there, whatever's blocking our way will come into view. And as far as the nothingness being the fullness, well, of course, the tradition tells us that. We become the fullness by passing through the nothingness. And what is the nothingness? From a spiritual philosophy point of view, it is having resolved all the samskaras. And even if they're, Bhagavan talks about the avaranas, he talks about this in talks, the coverings. Sometimes the coverings will just drop off temporarily. And we're in that state of nothingness or spaciousness. And that's almost like a taste of the peak, really. But of course, then everything comes back, and so our job is to extend those times. I don't know. I'm hesitant to say to formalize what the work is from that place. I think coming to a place of stillness is enough. From there, no maps or theories are needed. Yeah. But that's the 3,000-mile step. In other words, the step to stillness, that is a big one. And so I hear you articulating it very clearly. So, but of course, the goal is to make it a reality. if only incrementally, time to time, episodically. But that seems to me what Bhagavan is pointing us to. He says it in that quote, other than inquire, there are no other adequate means to make the mind quiescent. So that phrase comes at us very powerfully because it's telling us, one, the importance of inquiry, and two, what inquiry is leading us to make the mind quiescent, If we've got a quiescent mind, in a way, from that place, inquiry maybe not even that significant, except as just a continuation of that fascination and interest in stillness. But the stillness provides us with that. We don't need to bring that with us as an instruction. And in the place of quietude, I don't think any instructions can reach us there. So they're kind of null and void. That's what I would say.
There are two questions on Atma Vichara, can be brief, but there's a comment, and I think this needs to be clarified. The behavioral rat test seemed cruel and contrary to the principle of ahimsa. How can this be good?
Yeah, it's not good. Even Sapolsky mentions that. He's a kind of practitioner himself. So no, it's not good. And yeah, I mean, you have to kind of hesitate when you mention studies like that. It's not good. There's nothing good about it. Yeah. So I agree completely.
I have two more questions on Atma Vichara. What about repeating I, or I am inwardly? In Nanyar, Bhagavan said, even if one thinks constantly I, one will be led to that place.
Good. Well, right. And see, I think there, in a way, that is almost like, it's almost like a mantra in a way. You're just hanging on to a simple idea, something that can be repeated, and it stabilizes attention. So the big obstacles don't come when there's stillness. The big obstacles come prior to stillness to stabilize attention. That means to come free of the frenetic, compulsive, obsessive thinking mind. That's the obstacle. So the I or the who, and see, in a way, the who, the questioning can't come yet until the attention is stabilized. So there has to be some stillness, some stabilization, and the I helps us to bring that about, arguably.
This question is from a very experienced Zen meditator, so I think this might be. So the question, or rather, he'd like you to comment. I just sit facing a wall, and that brings me to stillness, and the boundary between me and others vanishes. I don't use question, for example, who am I, very often. Could you please comment?
Well, so that wall-facing Zen is typically Soto Zen. There is a tradition that's Rinzai Soto combined, and they face the wall, even though there's a Rinzai component. But it sounds like he's describing what in Zen they call shikantaza. That means just sitting. It's a very powerful practice. In Buddhism, that would map onto what we call shamatha. In Bhagavan's language, that would be like samadhi. And but is it an inquiry practice? Not exactly. Look, Bhagavan is giving us vichara to make the mind quiescent. If you can make the mind quiescent by any other means, probably just as good. Bhagavan would not argue with that. But arguably, even for an experienced meditator, someone who can make the mind quiescent through shikantaza, there'll be times where you can't. And that means at times when there's difficulty in the life, something coming from outside, or some events or conditions or stress or things happen in the life, right? And suddenly the magic path you had to stillness is not working. So there, we can, like what I'll just use following the breath. Bhagavan mentions this. It comes in the Zen tradition also. Just following the breath, using the breath, the rhythm of the breath to stabilize attention. And what has been said in the meditation traditions is that when the mind is agitated, maybe let's say stress or anxiety or some strong emotion, anger, fear, frustration, irritation, worry, or any other number of strong emotions, when those arise in the mind, the breath will become irregular. It's just a law of the human organism. In the neurobiology, they say that adverse, difficult emotions cause the sympathetic nervous system to become aroused, and the system that allows the nervous system to calm, the parasympathetic, it governs heart rate, respiration rate. So if the sympathetic nervous system becomes aroused, then by definition, the breath and the heart rate will be affected. So pre-vichara or pre-meditation exercises would help us to stabilize the attention when it's aggravated. And this is something that all meditators, I think, have found their own way to. So like when the mind is very agitated, I just focus on making the in-breath, I'll count in for 4 breaths, 4 counts, and exhale for maybe 12 or 16, so make the exhalation longer and deliberately extend the breath. I'm not using too much force. But if the mind is agitated, especially fear or anger or anxiety or stress, the breath will be funny and you can see it. But your mind may be so disturbed that you can't even notice how disturbed the breath is. So, training ourselves to regulate the breath can be useful as a preliminary step to practicing vichara. And vichara as a preliminary step to practicing shikantaza. Now, I know in some Soto traditions, they start you out with shikantaza. To me, that's amazing. There are other traditions that see shikantaza as a very advanced practice. That means just sitting, being still, being aware, without any tools whatsoever. But I think as long as you can practice shikantaza, there's no tools needed at that point. That's as good as it gets, you could say, arguably. But when the mind is disturbed, then we use those other tools. And I wouldn't say vichara is a beginning tool. I would say no, starting with the breath, or just even neuromodulating exercises to help stabilize the nervous system, to calm the nervous system, so that we can watch the breath, and we can watch the breath and stabilize the breath so we can move into something like vichara. And vichara arguably leads us to that place, what Bhagavan might call surrender, what Soto Zen might call shikantaza. I mean, I'm just using these words roughly, They sort of map onto each other roughly. Yeah, that's what I would say.
We're really out of time and extended, but this can just be a yes/no answer to this one. The question is, so are the sanskaras like the dragon guarding the opening to the cave, keeping us from the light of the self, which resides in the heart?
Well, yeah. I mean, again, we're just using, see that image of the cave. This is just, Bhagavan doesn't talk like this. He does say that the samskaras are it's only when we resolve the samskaras that the mind is resolved and the Dhatma buddhi is resolved. So he does say like that. But what I was doing there was using an image from children's stories. And every tradition around the world has something like that. So yes, the monster or the dark cave is the place that we don't want to go. And the reason we don't want to go into the dark cave, not least of all because we can't see and it's unknown, but we fear that there's something there that could hurt us. And that can hurt us are the samskars, the unresolved fragments of this life, of perhaps earlier births, something handed down to us, transgenerationally, the pitrudoshas, the karmic accumulations. That's the idea. It's just a metaphor. It's a simile. So I'll leave it there because I do feel bad. I've been going on so long and I felt like you guys didn't